Hi
Hello and
everyone.
welcome to another episode of Dadsplaining Politics. Hi, Freddie.
Sorry about that. We're in different time zones, so I'm not sure if the connection is getting our audio back to each other at the same time. So there may be a bit of overlap and a few awkward moments, but we'll try and get through them for you guys. Hi, Dada. How are you? How's everything?
I'm great, thank you. Greeting from Greece. And today we are going to
Greetings from
cover the
Greece.
latest on tariffs.
Every time you see him, he's in a new place.
The latest on tariffs. The latest news on Ukraine just breaking. A discussion around Francesca Albanese and the issues with the US. And then finally, the whole latest on Aukus and the
Not
balancing act with
Ukraine.
China.
Yeah. Okay. I'm not sure if I
All right.
misheard you or if the connection is just confusing, but let's get into tariffs first of all. Obviously, the tariff wars have been a massive deal over the past 6 months or so. You know, we've been navigating that, been postponed, postponed, postponed again. And the current situation is that a lot of them are set to come into action in August, the beginning of August. So the EU is set to still have a 30% tariff, regardless of all the efforts and work they have done to secure a lower tariff agreement. And I know that EU spokespeople have come out and said that they are quite surprised considering how much effort they have put into that task itself. So it's interesting to see how people react when effort is put in and sacrifices are made, compromises are made, and yet the Trump administration still doesn't respect those like increases in defense spending and increases in deference really just from every European leader across the board to Trump and his position. They're still imposing those tariffs.
I think the interesting thing, Freddie, is the fact that people assume normal diplomacy, right? So the underlings do all this work, and you'd assume that that helps move the ball forward. But I think in terms of the Trump administration, Trump fundamentally decides in the end, no matter how much work's been done by the underlings and other people, which causes huge frustration from an international point of view because it upends the normal way of working. But that's what Trump likes, as we all know, the chaos side of things.
Well, yeah, for sure. But I think there's only so long. I think that gives it a shock factor, right? Which means that people react in order to try and improve the situation for him, as right now has been happening. People across the board, you know, Mark Rutte, when Trump came for the NATO summit, of course, like just bowing down to him at every second of every day. They have been trying their best. But if they are shown that trying their best has no impact, will they continue to do it? Will they continue to bow down to him? If it has no effect, especially in terms of tariffs, because obviously the EU is America's biggest trading partner at the moment. And, you know, it would have monumental economic reaction in America as well as in the EU. So maybe they will get to the point where they'll have a tariff war and they'll just keep raising tariffs against each other until both are like economic breakdown.
Freddie, I already think the world doesn't believe Trump is serious about this, that he will back down again. I don't believe that these tariffs will stay. This is a continuation of round one. And, you know, the stock market, I can tell you, is not even reacting to this very much because they're assuming that he's going to balk and he's going to blink, which he always has done so far. And so
Yeah.
I think you're right. People don't
He
treat
doesn't
him.
have the balls to actually implement the tariff.
That's right, because he's worried about the US bond market and he's worried about the US stock market
Yeah,
and the whole thing. So I think the rest of
because
the
he
world is
rightfully knows. You go.
so I think the rest of the world is not taking it that seriously because in a way they regard him now as a toothless tiger because he's not following through on any of these things.
Oh, yeah, exactly. It's very much the boy who cried wolf, right? I mean, I think when we look to defense and foreign policy and everything happening with Ukraine, as we're going to talk about soon, I think that the EU will continue to bow down to Trump and try their best to please him. But when it comes to tariffs, there's only so far you can go. And I mean, this threat, if it's never implemented, everyone's just going to continue to ignore it until he does something about it, which, yeah, as you've said, the stock market has been doing since the beginning. And I think they've seen as well, the EU has said, because they're in a position, not the EU, but spokespeople of certain countries who understand the EU position, have said that because these tariffs aren't just targeting the EU, and they're targeting, obviously a bunch of different countries. They're targeting Mexico, they're targeting South Korea,
and
Japan,
Korea.
to different percentages. Yeah, then they feel like they can have a united approach back against the tariffs. So we'll definitely see what happens on that. August is not that far away, so it'll be interesting to see what he has the guts to
August
do.
1st actually is when August 1st is when it's meant to be happening. And
Yeah, exactly.
like we said many podcasts ago, there is an opportunity for the rest of the world to have new alliances of the global order and in fact bypass the US. So I think that will be interesting how that plays out.
And that's definitely slowly been happening over the past 6 months. New relationships have been formed, countries turning away from their typical relationships and maybe forming more regional partnerships as well. It'll be interesting to see how this affects the various, like you think about the EU as a European Union. There's a bunch of different agreements across the world, like there's the Indo-Pacific region and how these countries will be depending on each other, how Latin America may become more of a stronger bloc itself as well. I think when you have something to fight against, you become more united in general. And if everyone is just fighting against the Trump administration, maybe they'll become more united and can move away from America as such a centralizing power. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. But do we want to get on to
What's
talking about?
Yes, Ukraine. So
Okay.
breaking news on Ukraine. Trump is super pissed off with Putin and doesn't think he's taking things seriously. So it's interesting how he's finally
I
come
mean,
to that
that's
conclusion that the
less
rest.
breaking news. I think that happened a while ago.
Well, I think that the breaking news part is that the US is now going to send a huge weapons cache to Ukraine. The Europeans are paying for it all, which is great. That's fine. And they're going to be starting to send offensive weapons, missiles that can strike deep inside Russia. So this is really a big turning point in the war potentially, because if Ukraine is really supplied with offensive weapons and they've got their shackles taking off so they can actually start attacking Russia, it could cause a change in the momentum of this war.
Definitely. I was interestingly enough listening to something on the end of World War II the other day and the American led and British led, response back to the Soviet Union at the time, and how there are a few very prominent individuals who said that Europe must do everything in its power, every resource available to fight back against Russia because they are the ultimate enemy in this scenario. Like the NATO phrase they like to repeat, if you strike one of us, you strike all of us. So we'll see. Obviously, it's a good thing that they're paying for it. It's another tendency of the Trump administration trying to take responsibility and to take credit for something when they're simply not paying for it. They're just providing the weapons. They're acting as like a corporation rather than a government with foreign relationships. So, yeah,
That's true, but I don't
I'm not
mind that. I don't
necessarily.
mind that. So long as the right result happens, right?
Well, some
And of course
people
it'll be
mind
interesting
it.
because I know, but it was not ideal, but it's better than the alternative. And so,
But can I
the
can I
interesting thing with,
remind you? Can I remind you
sorry, go on.
quickly? This is not for our listeners, but this is more for you, Mark Phibbs, that the position that the US has been, where they have centered themselves in a position where they have benefited from the economic development that has gone on throughout the world for the past 20, like 30 years and more. They have benefited. They have set up a system that revolves around them. They are not equally balanced compared to the rest of the countries. They had like a superior jumping off point at the beginning of all of this, and the way that they've benefited even from climate change, etc., means that they owe a lot of shit to the rest of the world. They owe us. They weren't doing a nice thing by helping out the rest of the world. They were imposing themselves without people's permission into their like regional conflicts and then pulling out of them when they get stressed out or when they feel like it's not their place anymore. It is their place. They shouldn't be acting like a corporation. They rightfully owe other countries. And I just want to remind that because I think Trump keeps putting this idea into people's minds that the US doesn't owe anyone anything. They're just another country, but they're not simply another country. They are self-proclaimed leader of the free world. And there's a certain responsibility that comes along with that, even once you start denying the responsibility.
Agreed. That's a big topic. Let's make it for one of our whole
I know,
future
I know.
podcasts, right?
I'm just just using it. I think it's something we talk about a lot in the podcast. I don't think it's necessarily something we go into. I think most people listening to us understand that. I just want to remind you so you don't get caught up in all of Trump's ideology. That's all.
I'm just working with the scenario we have today, and that's the
Okay.
scenario we have today. So I would much rather the US be supplying weapons to Ukraine, which the Europeans can't supply, and so Ukraine can defend itself and, in fact, turn the tide of this
Mhm.
war. I think that's very good news, right? You can go into all the history and everything else. I'd like it to be a different way, but it's not a different way at the moment. So, and I think the Europeans are being very pragmatic on this as well, kowtowing to Trump to get what they want, paying their fair share. And by the way, in the past, they haven't paid their fair share. It's not really their fault because the US wanted to manage all this in the past and they never transitioned to getting the Europeans to pay. So there is some validity
Okay,
in the
but
US case now of the Europeans not paying enough, right?
this
And
is
now
why
they
I
are
felt the
paying
need
enough.
to say that because now you're saying that the Europeans never paid enough. This is why I felt the need to say that because it's exactly what I knew that you were thinking. But I think
No, but
that there's
recently
only
they haven't paid enough. In the first place, the US didn't want them to pay. And the US's fault is they should have transitioned to a world where the Europeans were paying more and told them, we expect that, but they didn't. So up until recently.
And where is this narrative coming from? Where are you getting this from?
It's,
No,
it
no,
is
I
the,
understand. We talked about, okay, pause for a second because
no, let's
sorry, I
not
have to keep
pause.
saying
Let's
pause because
continue
I'm
on.
trying for us not to speak over each other. No, I'm not saying pause the recording. I'm just saying pause so then we don't keep talking over each other so I can say something. I'm not trying to be rude. I'm just trying to understand this whole internet issue that we have going on. Okay, again, I just want to say that again, this is my opinion, so I do not agree with you necessarily. The EU has been spending less of their fair share because they do have defense budgets, and the US is an incredibly massive economy, and the EU is not a single country. And I think that the US tends to get confused about that and start to label the EU as a single country, which is not owing up like
But
giving the money and the defense
I get
capacity
that.
that it should be, but it's not.
I get that, but darling, don't make excuses for the EU. The EU should have a common defence policy, etc. They've got to improve their act. They've got a lot of things going for them, but they're not perfect, far
Okay.
from it. And the EU has a
Okay.
lot to learn and a
Right.
lot to improve in this world where they can't rely on the US,
Mhm.
right? And hopefully they'll
In a
get there.
world where the US wasn't being led by an autocrat who could soon become a dictator, they wouldn't need to worry about that. And I understand we've talked about many times the fact that now, due to the position they're in, they need to start spending more. I understand that. I understand that obviously, right now, at this point in time, they need to commit more to defense spending. I agree. But I'm just saying is that they're not necessarily in the wrong from the beginning, right?
Oh,
I
I
don't
agree.
think we should. Yeah.
We're
Okay,
violently
good.
agreeing. In the beginning,
Okay,
the
good.
US told the Europeans they wanted to manage the thing. They wanted to pay for it. That was 50 years ago. Maybe 25 years ago, the US
Up
should have.
until not 25, up until like a few years ago, the US kept putting this rhetoric out into the world. It wasn't 50 years ago, it was like 5 years ago.
Yeah, well, you're right, but they should have transitioned earlier, right? And a more balancing act between those
Yeah,
two.
but you have to admit that the US has a part to play in making them feel comfortable and making them
Oh,
feel
sure,
like
of
they
course
have
they did, of course. But
security.
and
Yes.
I don't buy your argument that things are going to go back to the way they were. I
I
think Europe
never
has
said that things are going to
to
go
take.
back to the way they were.
But
I
you said
never
after
mentioned that
Trump, after a
once.
dictator, the US will be more reasonable.
I
I'm not
didn't
so
say that.
confident of that.
You can go back in the
Okay,
recording and listen to everything I said. I said nothing to do with that. I said that soon, if he becomes a dictator, then etc. I never said
okay.
after. So
I don't
you're
think that's going to
mishearing
happen. I
me, and
think
now
this.
you're putting my words out there as if I said something stupid when I didn't.
No, I
So
didn't.
let's
I didn't
move
say
on to
that.
a different topic, please.
No, I did say that. I actually think the Supreme Court. I'm confident that they will stop him becoming a dictator.
Really? That's crazy. Have you seen the things that Supreme Court has done in the past few days? You didn't want to talk about this in this podcast because you didn't think we had enough time. But next time, let's go into it in our next episode because remarkable things have been done to give him like unfettered power in the past few weeks. And
Yeah, but
I'm really
the
shocked that
lady.
you haven't seen that.
No, but have you seen the article by Amy Coney Barrett, one of the Supreme Court justices? And Trump wanted to get
You're
rid of
listening
the.
You're listening to her?
Citizenship
You know who
right.
she is?
No, I do, darling. Can you just wait and listen to what I have to say? In terms of citizenship rights, Trump wanted to strip that of people born in the US. That is never going to happen. She wrote this very good paper on this to say, you've got to go through all the due processes, and fundamentally it's never going to happen. So Trump is backpedaling from that whole thing because the Supreme Court is never going to allow that. So just an example of the Trump administration wanting to do something and then saying, no, this is not going to happen.
That's probably the one example
So
you
it's
didn't find. So that's handy that you found that one. And it's interesting as well that you found an article that was written by one of the Trump appointed Supreme Court justices
Yeah, but
who
she's
is
the
writing
most
an article
mild of the
supporting
Trump
his
appointed ones.
actions.
He's kind of annoyed with her because she's actually reasonable.
Okay, let's move on to a different topic. We can do a special
All right.
episode
So
on this
next
sometime.
topic is AUKUS. AUKUS. So this is
Yes, but
interesting
what we were
because
going to talk about something else quickly
yes,
first,
yes,
and now you're
Francesca
doing that.
Albanese. Yes. Do you want to
Yes.
lead off?
Do you have anything to say on it?
Well, yes, I think this is, Francesca Albanese works for the UN. Good surname that
Yeah,
Albo
she's
would like.
a special rapporteur, I think that's the name, for
Yep.
everything's happening in Gaza.
So she has come out firmly against Israel and their terrible behavior in Gaza, etc. And Marco Rubio has responded saying, this is totally unacceptable. The UN's, saying such things. So it's really the battle of the world order versus, the US view of the world here. And so I think good for her. She's courageous. I feel like with lack of leadership from the UN by the Secretary General, it's good that other people in the UN are standing up and actually saying something. So perhaps she's a future leader of the UN.
Okay, that's interesting. I agree with you, obviously, that she is holding true to what she's saying because she is a specialist on this subject. And more specifically, she put out a report on which countries were also like participating in the genocide by funding it. So she named quite a few countries, including Amazon, McDonald's, and a bunch of other places. And she put out a very impressive analytical report on that a while ago, which is also why there's been a lot more attention focused on her as of recently. And if you've listened to her, she is incredibly coherent arguments just basically about the loss of life. I mean, everyone has gotten to the point where they agree that it's horrific what's going on there. But I just want to say quickly, the Secretary General Antonio Guterres does an excellent job, and lots of people have said that he is the one voice standing out against the litany of leaders who have been supporting Trump. I think that this just shows how little impact that the UN has when other countries aren't standing behind it, rather than the weakness of the people who are actually working at the UN. It's the weakness of the UN as an institution itself, because he's been very strong in his opinion of what's going on. So, yeah, I just think I've seen more coverage of what goes on in the United Nations than you have, because
That's
he's
fair
definitely
that he's
done it.
not getting the support from France and UK and others that he
I mean,
should
what
get.
else do you expect him to do?
I'm just saying he's not a very effective communicator, and
No,
I
Dada,
don't
he's
think
done
he has
excellent
gathered these other
speeches and been.
nations sufficiently. Maybe he has tried to gather these other nations and they've just not responded. I don't know, Freddie, but the
Dada,
results are not
stop,
great,
stop
and that may
talking
not be
about
his
this,
fault. It
because
may
he
be the
has
fault.
done an excellent job. So don't just leave it there. We'll talk about Aukus now because he's done an incredible job. And I ask anyone who disagrees with me to look into some of his speeches and to look into some of his statements as of recently, because he's done a great job. But his voice has been quietened, obviously, by the media and by all the leaders who are trying their best to keep peace. So yeah, let's talk about Aukus. Do you want to lead with that?
Yes, so AUKUS, very interesting. Anthony Albanese is in China at the moment and been touring Shanghai and has been very impressed with the future status of Shanghai, all electric cars everywhere, drones, very much Blade Runner scenario. China is capturing the future. They have a huge island off Shanghai, which is a port with all automation, AI and robots, etc. Only a few humans there. So this is their competitive advantage. They're way ahead of the US and other countries in the world in this regard. So it's good that Albo's there. Now the balancing act is the US is doing a review of AUKUS, and the latest rumours out of this review are the US wants Australia to pay a lot more, and they want Australia's commitment to support the US in a war with China regarding Taiwan. And under that scenario, the US would take control of the nuclear submarines. They potentially will have provided to Australia. So this is crazy stuff because this would mean that we didn't have sovereignty over the submarines that we had purchased from the US. So it's going to be fascinating.
Well,
And clearly,
ownership.
Albo has to balance the
Sovereignty
ownership,
specifically
the
applies to
interests
like
of
land.
China versus
Yeah.
the US.
Yeah. Okay.
A lot of
Yeah.
people talk
No,
about
I
the
mean,
sovereignty of the ownership.
but I don't know if I'm not sure if that's correct. But yeah, I mean, we've talked about this in a bunch of episodes, how we don't think that AUKUS has any relevance anymore because the US have clearly stated, and it seems clear in their reports as well of how the submarines have been going, that they will not be ready by this given time, and that the US is behind on their own commission of submarines. So they will simply just be taking them. So I wonder why the Trump administration is even bothering to set out these new requirements or new asks from Australia when it seems clear to most analysts in this area that we're never going to receive the submarines anyway. I wonder if they're
Yeah.
trying to keep up the guise of the whole thing by laying out more terms. So then it seems like they're doing it in a professional
Oh, so
military way
you think
rather
they
than
might
just
be doing it in you think they might be doing it intentionally so it's easier for Australia to walk away?
No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that I think like it's obvious that they were going to keep the submarines regardless, but maybe they're trying to use this as a bargaining chip. They know they're going to get the submarines regardless. Australia is not 100% certain that they're going to get their submarines or not get the submarines. So if the US pretends to be doing a review on AUKUS and pretends to be analyzing if the submarines are a good commitment or not, then maybe they can influence Australia to increase defense spending and give them more money. Do you see what I mean?
Right.
Maybe they can use this as a bargaining chip to get more from Australia, more funding and more defense commitment without still giving them the submarines. So just keeping up the guise
Right.
of it a little bit longer and putting
I
us in
see.
even a worse situation than we are already. But that's just
Yeah.
a
Anyway, we
that's
can always go back. We can always go back to the French nuclear submarines. Macron will be happy,
I
and
don't think
Malcolm
we can
Turnbull
go
will be
back to
happy if
that.
that
I think that that is off the table.
it is. Okay. All right.
The
Anyway, so
French are
that's
not stupid
great.
enough.
So good talking to you, Freddie. Hopefully you
Yeah,
enjoyed this
been good.
episode, and please subscribe and like us and comment.
Like
And
and
we'd love to get some more
subscribe.
questions. And we will see you next week. And happy Bastille Day to those who celebrate.
Thank you
Bye.
guys. Bye.